Early in the conversation, and Chris, I really appreciate you joining us. Like you have no idea. Like I've been your biggest champion. We were actually talking about censorship and how what is Rumble going to be moving forward, and what are like some of the attack vectors. And my summation was, and I've listened to a lot of things that you've said, Chris, and I stood up for you. I said, like, number one, he's going to maintain, power of the board, so on and so forth, and the mission moving forward is going to be censorship proof, and you're going to build out these servers. Like I know Tim Pool came over to Rumble, brought Timcast over. I know Dan Bongino and Dave Rubin are connected with you, and I've heard you on long form actually have these debates of whether or not that Rumble could be censorship proof. And the summation that I made was, I believe that Rumble can be censorship proof until it comes to the App Store and Google Play Store, Chris. And a lot of people are concerned about how the future of that looks. Like we know now under your direction that Rumble absolutely would be censorship proof in everything that you've done. But can you speak to like what the future looks like 5, 10 years, 15 years down the line, Chris? Thanks for joining us, by the way.
You bet. So this is Chris, founder, CEO of Rumble. Thanks for having me on. We got to get this simulcasted onto Rumble as a live stream as well for video. That'd be pretty cool. So when it comes, you make a really good point when it comes to the app stores. The app stores are definitely a vector in which you have to be wary of. But one of the places where Rumble is very dominant in is obviously web. But the other place where you're seeing like a lot of we are seeing a lot of growth is in OTT. So there's multiple different places on OTT. It's a little more fragmented than the mobile phone. But when you're watching long form, most of the consumption is actually coming from the television, Apple TV, Roku, you name it, Fire TV, Android TV, LG, Samsung, etc. So there's all these. The market for OTT is extremely fragmented, and there's a lot of growth coming from there. And when you look at the long form, that's kind of where it's all centralized around. When it comes down to clips, and if you're more like TikTok, you're going to see a lot of that action on mobile phones. But currently, from what we're seeing, there's a lot of consumption on OTT where it's fragmented. There's obviously consumption on our apps on Google and Apple. And then a lot of the consumption for us, actually, the most of our MAUs is actually happening on web, because when people share, they're sharing from browser to browser, chat app to chat app to the browser, etc.
Chris, first of all, thanks for coming, and I appreciate you having Andrew Tate on the platform because he's my friend. In terms of in terms of a question about the specific point we're talking about, basically we know that the Apple removal of Parler essentially ended Parler. So how reliant are you on that, and what would happen if, in the hypothetical situation, they did make some kind of like crazy move?
Yeah, so I think like Parler's death actually came from the reliance on Amazon AWS. Once they lost their hosting provider, they lost their company. The removal from the app stores was obviously detrimental to them. In Rumble's case, we don't rely on Amazon AWS. We've built out our own infrastructure across multiple data centers across the country. And that's what allows us to be extremely resilient against any kind of censorship demands. You've kind of seen us challenge governments like France. France was requesting us to remove certain content creators. We've seen the Brazilian Supreme Court do requests to remove content creators on Rumble. And we're essentially the only platform that doesn't comply when it comes to these type of censorship demands from outside of the country, outside of the United States. So every platform, including the one we're on right now, does comply to these demands, whereas we do not. And that is stemming from the ability for us to host our own site, our own apps within the Rumble cloud infrastructure. When it comes to the app stores, they're obviously important. They're right now, though, web is definitely by far the most important for us. And we see the most MAUs come from web as a company. And in terms of consumption per user, OTT has got the highest consumption for us.
Chris, sorry, go ahead, Simon. No, you can ask your question.
So you mentioned something quite important, and it's about having requests from certain countries. And you mentioned Brazil and so on and so forth. So I mean, I'm not sure if you've come across this or if it's happened already, but if you have a country who essentially is gonna ban Rumble in that entire country unless you ban a specific content creator, like how would you deal with that?
So we have dealt with that with France. We turned Rumble off entirely to France. You cannot access Rumble in France. They threatened to, they said they were going to cut us off at the telco level if we didn't remove certain content creators. In this case, these
And
content creators.
yeah, who were they, Chris? I'm curious.
Russia Today and a bunch of other Russian-related content creators.
Okay. And so you've opted to lose France as a customer base, then removing those creators.
Yeah, the principle for us to uphold the freedom of expression and authentic expression far exceeds anything that we'll do for any other country. So whether it's China telling us to shut it down, or whether it's North Korea telling us to shut it down, or whether it's France telling us to shut it down, we're going to tell them all to go to pound sand.
But Chris, there was a point made, I can't remember which speaker it was, and they made a point, I think it wasn't Robert, and they made a point about your liability for shareholders or your responsibility for shareholders as a public company. If you make decisions that uphold your ideology, but that could harm your profitability, then you could be liable to your shareholders. Is that accurate, and have you thought of that?
We've thought about this extensively. One of the things we did when we went public is we made it very clear to all the shareholders into the way we went public is that we will be the platform that will be anti-cancel culture and anti-censorship. So our biggest liability right now to our shareholders is to not uphold that. We're a company that's going to stick to this value and this mission. It's on our corporate page. It's what everybody knows us for. The liability for us leaving that far exceeds the liability of us turning off a country that doesn't follow those values.
Chris, another thing we discussed earlier was Rumble's growth. So if you can give us a bit of an idea of like what level of growth you've seen and what kind of growth you're expecting.
Well, yeah, we talked about that in our last earnings. We hit 80 million monthly active users across the globe. We had 65 million in the US and Canada. To put that in perspective, Twitter had about 68 million the last time they reported MAUs, which I think was around 2019. With respect to YouTube, they have about 200 million MAUs in the United States, and Twitter had 68 million in the United States. So I'm comparing the US traffic versus not the global number. But when it comes to Rumble in the United States, we stand as a pretty large platform in comparison to YouTube and Twitter and everyone else.
Yeah, it's like, so isn't that the argument, Chris, right? So like the vast majority of users that are in the United States, I mean, wouldn't that dictate policy moving forward? So like, I understand France, I understand Germany. I mean, it would be a small percentage, but like ultimately, if I were to actually provide a service to a specific demographic, I would actually go after my biggest chunk, which would be US based users. And so people made the argument. They said, well, I mean, are you honoring the shareholders if you allow these policies to creep in? And because if France wants to ban you, I mean, yes, maybe. But like, I don't know that the goal is actually to overtake YouTube, right, Chris? I mean, like, the goal would be to actually build a very highly engaging, very active type user base that believe in that same message. Yes.
Yeah, the goal of the company is to become a platform that upholds the ability for expression and authentic expression, and we'll do our best to monetize that to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
When it comes to like what another goal of another country is, that's none of our business, nor do I care. I care about the company that we're building here in the United States, and that's it.
Well played, Chris. I like. Yeah, hold on, man. Just I like how Dylan. I just want to comment quickly on Chris's point. How you've communicated it clearly to shareholders that this is going to be your strategy. Because then legally you can make the argument if anyone criticizes you, like, hey, you've pulled out of this country that hurt your profitability. You'd be like, yes, but if we don't pull out of the country, it goes against our whole thesis, which could further harm the company. So legally speaking, you've put yourself in a very good position, man. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to be well played. I do want to go to the other hands that are up, so I'll give you some
Yeah,
credit there. I didn't expect that
yeah.
answer.
But like Mario, like that was my point I made earlier. If they came from the outset and they said, "Listen, this is what we represent. This is what we're going to do," and
Yeah.
anybody that invested in the company, they said, "Okay, well, we know what we're investing in because from the outset, this is what we said we're going to do." That is not
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah. So there's a point, as I said. Let's
Sorry,
go,
sorry.
guys. Sammy, let's go to
Just for the
other
hands, I've got
hands.
one more question, and then I will go to the hands. Sorry, I'm hogging it. But
Yeah.
Chris, one last question, because you mentioned that your focus is the United States. But there isn't that a risk? Like, shouldn't your focus be more global? Because let's say the United States,
I said that.
I don't. Okay, if trust said that.
So actually, Chris, one last question, and then we'll go to Justin and Dylan and others. Your thoughts on what happened with Tucker Carlson? I'm seeing people in the audience asking that question that we completely skipped over. Focus a lot on Rumble. What are your thoughts? How do you interpret what happened? Do you know something that we don't know?
So yeah, I think it's an incredibly large moment, a pivotal moment. I've been saying for a long time that independent media is going to surpass corporate media. I think a moment like this is a moment where we can all look at television in general, or all corporate media in general, and say for the very first time that there isn't any more free expression on any of those channels, or any big tech for that matter. It's all controlled speech. We're now moving into a zone where everything is controlled speech, and there's very few places you're going to get real, authentic expression. And I think this is a real pivotal moment where the independence of creators are going to take over. We saw it with Steven Crowder. I am not sure if you're familiar, but Steven Crowder is probably one of the most powerful independent voices online, where he can generate substantial amount of revenue. He's on Rumble. In the first 10 days of him being on Rumble, well, no, first 10 days of him announcing he's going to Rumble, he accumulated over 57,000 paying members at $89 a month. You can do the math. That's a lot of money.
We
And
talked
that
about
was
it
before
earlier. Yeah.
that was before he even started his show on Rumble. So you can only imagine where that is now. So the independent model is something that is moving very quickly, and something that we're obviously at the forefront for that. And it allows,
So
the most important part about that is that every creator that comes to Rumble can authentically express themselves. And that's what people are searching for. That's why they're paying for people like Crowder. And that's why they'll pay for someone like Tucker. And I really do believe advertisers are going to follow that audience, and they kind of already started. And that'll accelerate what we're seeing with advertising boycotts right now is not sustainable. And if it's something these companies want to dig their feet into, it'll create an entirely new economy of new brands.
Chris, I'm going to ask one more question, actually. And we're known to break news on this space, as we always have. And I think you were there. Either you spoke on our stage, or you almost jumped in when we did the Twitter files a long time ago. So the question, he gives you the opportunity to give us a nice scoop. Are you guys in communication with Tucker or his team about coming onto Rumble?
Well, as you know, we're a public company. I can't really talk about anything
shit.
with respect to.
Yeah,
respect
public
to
listed.
negotiations.
Rumble earnings are coming out in a few weeks, so maybe in a quiet period.
Hey, Mario.
So Justin, go ahead.
Sure.
And then
Look, Chris, thank you so much for being here. Look, simulcast, multi-channel, these cross-medium strategies are such a big part of every cable, radio, and online talent's portfolio now. And I've witnessed these hosts who will literally come off stage, hop off site from Network HQ, phone in to do their web shows, or do it from their car or otherwise. I do a radio show here for Salem's the station here in San Diego. They take my show, they podcast it, they simulcast it. Everyone loves that. But from your point of view on this same line of questioning, where do you put your emphasis? Is it best for you, best for Rumble to go after the exclusive talent, or are you satisfied with being, the alternate, also ran sort of broadcast channel where people also put their stuff?
Well, we're really trying to go after all categories of content, whether it's exclusive or not exclusive. It doesn't really, as long as the content is on the platform, it's very important to us. We've obviously are making like a massive push outside of just politics. We want to be a lot more than that. We've brought on like some really big names, such as like DJ Academics, one of the leaders in the hip hop culture space. We also brought Gideon, who's like a huge YouTuber that's now live streaming on Rumble. And we've also said recently that we've signed some really big, some of the biggest Twitch streamers. So that's not yet announced yet, but you'll hear more in the future. But we're really trying to broaden the content portfolio, because one of the issues that we're seeing with our viewership is they might consume an exclusive show from Steven Crowder, but then they want to know how to cook a steak. So we really want to bring in everything.
Let me give you a quick compliment, Chris, before we go to the next question. You talk about hosting this show on Rumble in video format as well as Twitter Spaces. So where the company that owns the show is working to go public later this year, has been in the works for a few months now. And one of the things that our investors said, one of the first things they said, is they didn't say, why don't you guys host the show on YouTube? I kid you not, they said, why don't you guys host the show on Rumble as well? So just a bit of a compliment there. But let's go to Slayman and Dylan with more questions.
Yeah. Just had one other question, which was you mentioned, it was mentioned that you're going to focus on the US. Now, isn't that a risk? Because let's say US put more restrictive measures in place that'll completely harm your basically entire business.
Yeah, what that would mean is that they're removing the First Amendment, which I don't foresee that happening anytime soon or ever. So we're not worried about that one bit.
Dylan?
Thank you, Mario. And Chris, it's an honor to talk to you. By the way, I'm 18 years old and I'm a conservative. I'm getting involved in politics. So I wanted to ask you, because I'm just curious, out of all your years doing this business with this app and going to other countries, encouraging people to download your app, what is probably the number one question that like a business person or a big person would ask you about your app? And tell us like what is, obviously I know there's a free speech difference from YouTube to Rumble, but what are some features that we see on Rumble that we normally would not expect on YouTube?
So obviously, like the fact that every single creator has the ability to be extremely authentic is the main feature, and I think the most important feature by far. One of the things that we definitely, I think we do much better than any of the competition, is that we have a subscription service that far exceeds the abilities of any of our competition out there. If you're not, if you haven't seen what Mug Club looks like on Rumble by Steven Crowder, I suggest you do. I don't think there's another platform out there that has that ability, and that's because of the acquisition that we made with locals.com for the subscription side of Rumble. I think that nobody really has that type of private social network that's offered for, video chatting, etc., that Rumble has when we purchase locals.com. So that's something that's a really unique feature to Rumble, and one of the key driving forces behind Mug Club and Steven Crowder's Mug Club, and for a lot of our creators like Dave Rubin, etc. So that would be probably the most important feature to Rumble right now in terms of the difference outside of obviously authentic expression.
Well, I would also, real quick, I would also say that I'm actually able to check out of Rumble on the app and like go onto Twitter and like tweet while I'm listening to a podcast, like by Dan Bongino, which I do often, or Steven Crowder, or a lot of these other people. I'm actually, without having a premium subscription service, I'm actually able to check out and be able to go on. That's a really big feature to me, Chris.
Yeah, lots of people say that as well. Having the background play without paying for it is definitely very important for a lot of people.
Joe?
Robert?
So sorry, Joe. Go ahead, Robert. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. When we were talking earlier, I worked in marketing for a really long time, and I was asked why do I think you won't be shut down? And typically, I'm just curious. Brands that have a really strong point of view, typically advertisers don't care as much. They're not as worried because they know what to expect. It actually helps them target users. Have you found that advertisers have been resistant to your platform, or they've been pretty accepting to your platform? And how important is that for funding the project? Is it a large portion of? I assume it's a large portion of your revenue, or is it the subscriptions?
Yeah, if you take a look at our latest earnings and compare it to like the previous earnings, you're going to see like quite a bit of growth in revenue. And that's coming from like multiple different areas of the business, obviously. And advertising is a big portion of it. Subscriptions becoming a larger portion of it recently. But when it comes to ads, one of the things that's been really unique to Rumble is the audience is like highly converting. So we're able to run a lot of direct response type of ads and generate a lot of revenue from direct response type of ads. Mind you, we also don't have ads in our app that are, pre-roll ads in our app. We don't have it on OTT. We've really haven't really ramped that side of the business up yet. So these are very early day testing. And you can see it in our latest earnings, how fast that is growing in terms of the revenue side. And that's mostly attributed to a lot of direct response type of advertising. Now
So it's
we've
mostly
also,
self-serve. Sorry,
yeah,
it's mostly self-serve.
yeah, we launched a self-serve ad system called Rumble Advertising Center, also known as RAC, and you can bring in your ads through there. Now we've also brought in a lot of exclusive sports leagues, like we're running the Street League skateboarding championships this weekend. We took that away from ESPN. That stuff will have different type of advertisers, less of the direct response, more of the brand. And we brought on Nitro Rallycross Racing onto Rumble. We signed them exclusively. We also have the Slap League that's exclusively on Rumble, and then we also have like other channels like the UFC that are now on Rumble. So we have a lot of stuff that brands are more interested in that they can choose from as of recently. But yeah, the strategy is to have it all. But what we find is the current audience that's on Rumble is really highly converting and a very sought after audience for any type of product that needs direct response. So we're feeling very good about that. And then obviously with these additions of sports leagues onto Rumble in different verticals of content, if brands want to be a part of that, they can choose to do so.
And how
Chris,
about
before
the big?
hold on,
the
Joe.
big
Guys, let me ask one question about the pressure you're facing. We've been speculating, Chris, about the pressure you're facing in terms of Rumble not censoring content, and we've seen the pressure other social media platforms have faced and Twitter files. Have you been facing significant pressure yet, or would you say you're not at the size where, as you get bigger, you'll be facing more pressure? And you've been getting bigger, so maybe pressure's starting to ramp up in recent months.
Well, yeah, the pressure from governments is there to censor content. Definitely, the pressure from I think we're at a point right now where advertisers know better not to put pressure on us, because if they do, we just tell them to, we're not for you. And we did that like about a year ago. There was like a network that wanted to censor Dan Bongino on Rumble, and we literally canceled them from the entire platform. If they're not interested in working with one of our top creators, then you might as well not be on the platform at all. This was like a really bold move that we made, and then since then we really haven't had any pressure at all from anybody. It's been once you kind of make a move like that, they kind of stay away from making these type of like really odd requests.
Well, and yeah, it's like Chris, to that point. I mean, that's actually kind of great. Like, right, you resisted the initial push, and then it's kind of like, okay, I'm just going to leave this alone. I'll go focus my attention elsewhere. But I want to bring Name Redacted on this because I think he's going to talk about something. So go ahead, Name. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you, Chris. And one thing before I ask the question, Mario, you mentioned earlier as far as shareholder liabilities. So when a company is publicly traded and they file their earnings, I'm looking at Rumble's it looks like their latest 10K. Right on the top, these are usually like 150 pages or so, but in the very beginning, they list risk factors that could affect the company. And one of them it says this, compliance obligations imposed by new privacy laws, laws regulating social media platforms and online speech in the US and Canada, or industry practices may adversely affect our businesses. So basically, when because the company makes that disclosure, if you buy stock, you know what you're getting into. So there's not going to be sort of a rug pull there. But my question, Chris, is based on that risk factor alone, the Restrict Act. I assume you're aware with it of that, and we've discussed that on these spaces for hours. Do you see that potentially, because it's so open-ended? Do you see that as a potential risk to your platform?
So when it comes to like proposed legislation, I don't really comment on that right now. I'm not going to make any comments on. There's a lot of legislation in Canada, a lot of legislation in the United States. There's also the legislation in New York that we challenged and we successfully won. With respect to platforms having to have like have the ability for people to report hate. Now that's being appealed by the New York AG. But when it comes to like proposed legislation, we don't really put any kind of opinion on that. So I'm going to stay away from talking about the Restrict Act.
Osos?
Hey, Chris, I appreciate you joining on. I do have a question because you're talking about the censorship aspect of it, and so what is Rumble's policy if, let's say, you have content creators, which has happened in the past and is still very active here, that pushes either ISIS propaganda videos, terrorist contents, gory contents? Because I hear the claim is censorship, so I really want to get in the bottom. Like, what is Rumble's policy if you start seeing those types of videos uploaded?
Yeah, so our terms and conditions are, outlined on our terms. Obviously terrorist activity is not something we tolerate on the platform at all.
Hey, also that didn't go the way you wanted. Also, did it?
No.
That crushed the question.
No, but okay. So I understand. But let me rephrase it this way. So just to make sure I understand the censorship piece, because what I see a lot in Meta, for example, they have very strict. They claim they have very strict rules, right? But when we're talking about, let's say, cartels, which is something I cover in Meta, Twitter, etc., it is absolutely rampant cartel propaganda throughout all social media platforms. And they claim they have a very strict policy, but it's very difficult to actually enforce it. And so my question for you, in your opinion, if you start having content creators that glorify not violent content, but just cartel activity, saying specific groups are great, better, etc., does Rumble have a specific policy to address that and to combat that type of propaganda or information in Rumble?
Yeah, so there's when it comes to judging content, and especially over a phone call, that's very difficult to do. There's a lot of context with respect. There's historical context. There's a documentary. There's a lot of different variables that go into looking at content. So I'm not going to get into the weeds of saying what content would be banned on Rumble and what would not at this point. I can just point you to the terms. You can look at them there. But I want to stay away from talking about judging specific pieces of content on this space.
So Chris, let's do one more question from Robert. Robert, I'll ask one more question after you, and then we can wrap it.
Was it in the Joe Rogan case? Was he about to be deplatformed, and you were talking with? Was Rumble talking with at that point? What? I'm just looking at as kind of a surrogate for somebody like a Tucker Carlson. What discussions were you having with Rogan, and was he trying to do parallel platforms?
So I think you're referring to the public offer that we made to Joe Rogan. We made that back in February. That was a public offer. That was not a negotiation directly with Joe Rogan.
Cool. Chris, I've got two last questions for you. The first question, man, is You must be excited today. Like we saw the amount of pushback against Fox after they let go of Tucker, and we saw something similar with CNN as well. And we're seeing that massive trend against mainstream media. It's kind of one of the first points you're making. So that puts Rumble in a pretty strong position. I'll just kind of wrap it up in one last question. Talking about the space that we do here, I know you've listened to it in the past, and you talked about us simulcasting it onto Rumble. Would love to get your thoughts. We ask this to every special guest that we get. Thoughts on, town halls like we do here on Twitter Spaces, replacing mainstream media. Would love to get some feedback on that as a final wrap up for the space.
Yeah, well, I think we're like at that inflection point right now where do we all want to watch legacy cable television on our TVs, or do we want to be in an environment on Rumble or Twitter or wherever it may be where you can interact with the audience, have a two-way conversation, but most importantly, and like this is by far the most important, I think like as adults, we all have the capacity to make up our own minds of what we want to hear and what we don't want to hear, and what we believe is true and what is not as true. The most important thing is being able to express authentically what you believe and what you want to talk about, and not being censored, not being told you can't say this or that, not being treated like a child, like you can't hear something. I think that's by far the most important thing, and that's why platforms like Rumble have been growing. We talk about liability of getting away from that. The liability destroys the platform. We need to stick to, and frankly, I like fundamentally believe in anything else in the world, and I want to stand on that for as long as I live, and I will. That is the most important thing, having the ability to authentically express and be in an environment where you can talk to your audience, collaborate with your audience, and do things that you can't really do on cable TV or these other mediums, including big tech for that matter these days. So I think it's a turning point. I think now today we can officially say that everything on cable TV is controlled speech for the very first time. I feel very confident about that. And if you want to have authentic speech and you want to hear authentic speech, then you have to come to a place like Rumble. And I think it's a great moment for all independent creators across all different platforms. So I'm pretty excited. I'm extremely excited for that proposition, but also sad at the same time that your traditional cable TV doesn't offer authentic expression anymore.
Chris, usually what we do is, as co-hosts, we wrap up the space with final words, recapping everything's being discussed. But I think the way you've wrapped it up is a great place to end. So I appreciate you coming on, as always. I appreciate all the audience members. I think we've been doing this for over 10 hours. Everyone's exhausted. And Chris, thanks a lot for jumping at the end with the mic drop. I hope to see you again on here. Guys, go get some rest. I'll go to sleep as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. And Chris, thanks for jumping on. Bye, everyone.